In 1973, behind locked doors, the erasing began. Metal drawers opened in silence. Secrets were removed. Paper met steel in the dark. Years of covert operations collapsed into drifting fragments. No witnesses. By morning, nothing remained, except a silence that felt intentional. It began earlier. In 1953, beneath the tension of the Cold War, a decision took form behind closed blinds. One rigid figure signed without hesitation. No speeches, no debate. The stamp struck paper in the dark. Approved. And with that single sound, something invisible was set in motion. Fear defined the era. Behind sealed doors, maps stretched across tables marked with red lines. The threat was unseen, yet it shaped every decision. They did not speak of morality. They spoke of survival. If the enemy could master the mind, it had to be mastered first. Paranoia quietly became policy. In isolated laboratories, the experiments began. Metal chairs, weighted beneath cold overhead light. Subjects sat in silence. Glass vials rested beside polished instruments. Every step was measured and recorded. Science advanced. Somewhere in the process, the human line began to fade. A single drop could shift reality. A glass of water rested on cold metal, untouched. Ripples spread in widening circles. No warning, no consent. The substance vanished without a trace. From the outside, nothing changed. But inside, something irreversible had begun. Years later, the silence began to fracture. Under unforgiving lights, questions were finally spoken aloud. Documents stacked high across polished wood. Microphones waited. Cameras watched without blinking. For the first time, the shadows were no longer hidden. They were being asked to answer. Orders moved quietly through official channels. Some files were marked for review. Others were marked for destruction. In the corner, a machine stood ready. Once activated, it showed no preference, no memory. What survived was decided in seconds. What disappeared was never meant to return. Boxes surfaced from forgotten storage rooms. Ledgers thick with numbers and coded references. Funding streams hidden behind ordinary labels. Nothing obvious. But patterns began to emerge. Money had moved in silence for years. And silence, it seemed, had been expensive. The investigation widened. More names surfaced. More dates aligned. Testimonies overlapped in uncomfortable ways. Some answers were rehearsed. Others carefully avoided. The room remained formal, composed. But beneath the surface, certainty was collapsing. Then the story reached the public. Television screens flickered with fragmented revelations. Headlines hinted at something deeper. Words like experiments and control entered living rooms. Viewers watched in disbelief. Officials denied what they could. But doubt had already spread. and doubt is difficult to contain. On the streets, conversations changed. Trust felt thinner. Institutions, once unquestioned, now seemed distant. People stood closer to suspicion than certainty. No protests filled every corner, but something subtle had shifted. When secrecy becomes visible, confidence rarely survives untouched. On the streets, conversations changed. Trust felt thinner. Institutions, once unquestioned, now seemed distant. People stood closer to suspicion than certainty. No protests filled every corner, but something subtle had shifted. When secrecy becomes visible, confidence rarely survives untouched. At some point, a line had been crossed, perhaps quietly, perhaps deliberately. What began as protection had evolved into control. What was justified as defense blurred into intrusion. Ethics were discussed in theory, but rarely in practice. And the cost was carried by those who never agreed. Years later, black ink covered entire pages. Names removed. Details obscured. Sections erased even in disclosure. What was revealed felt incomplete. What remained hidden felt intentional. Transparency arrived, carefully edited, leaving as many questions as answers. Decades passed. Technology evolved. Screens multiplied. Data replaced paper. But the central question remained unchanged. How far should control extend? Surveillance feels different now, yet strangely familiar. The archive stands quiet once more. Cabinets closed. Dust suspended in still air. What was destroyed cannot return. What was revealed cannot be forgotten. History does not disappear completely. It waits for those willing to look.